Welcome everyone to this very much important climate event at the COP30 here in Berlin. Welcome all participants, speakers and distinguished guests, and also to all those of you who are joining us virtually. My name is Sarah Treyrup, and I'm from the UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center, where I lead the work on technology, transitions and systems innovation. At the UNEP Copenhagen Center, we work in collaboration with the UNFCCC Technology Mechanism, being the Climate Technology Center and Network, and the Technology Executive Committee, in preparing what we call an annual Climate Technology Progress Report. This year, the report focuses on advancing bio-based technologies for bioeconomy. It takes stock of where we are at in enabling climate technology development and transfer. We have an overall focus on assessing how we move from identified needs to actual implementation of climate technologies, and specifically this year on bio-based technologies. So the Climate Technology Progress Report series aims to bridge between policy and implementation and actual action in countries. It investigates what leads to successful development and transfer, where are the gaps, and how do we enabling and amplifying climate action. So now it's my pleasure to invite a video statement from the chair of the Climate Technology Center and Network Advisory Board, Mr. Stephen Minas. So I would kindly ask that we now display the video with his welcoming remarks, as he is unfortunately unable to join us here in Berlin.
It's a great pleasure to join you for the launch of this year's Climate Technology Progress Report. Since this series began in 2022, the Climate Technology Progress Report has quickly established itself as a landmark on climate calendar, alongside UNEP's adaptation and emission reports. From the side of the Climate Technology Center Network, the CTPR, we greatly value our collaboration this report with the UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center and the UNFCCC Technology Executive Committee. And I would like to congratulate, in particular, all of the authors, viewers, contributed to this excellent document. Truly a team effort. I'd also like to acknowledge COP30 presidents for their leadership and CTPR this mission. It could not be more timely than this year's climate technology progress report is focusing bioeconomy. You have to acknowledge, of course, that in many ways the global south is providing leadership in terms of the global bioeconomy and climate change. This is something to celebrate and indeed to build upon. The convergence of climate, biodiversity and land use priorities presents an equal opportunity. This climate technology progress really provides a roadmap for how to make the most of that opportunity in climate continuity. Of course, sorry, I can't be there. You are at the center of a region of immense ecological significance. And this COP is indeed a pivotal moment to elevate the nature in climate policy. This report will help to shape that moment, highlighting, as it does, key roles played by both domestic policy and international cooperation and finance, bringing to the table both regionally and global perspectives. So I am confident that this report will make a unique contribution, at least by examining technology and progress in national systems of innovation, which is, of course, a framework which is also central to the CTPR's practical work, working with developing countries. So let me close, colleagues, to say that the report is, of course, about the bioeconomy, which means it is both about nature and about people. The deployment of bio-based technologies aligned with social justice and indeed environmental integrity. I look forward to this report being taken up and applied by decision makers and communities as we work together to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement, including through the bioeconomy. Thank you very much, colleagues, and I wish you an excellent event.
So thank you very much to Stephen for these words, and also not least for the support we have from Stephen from the CTCN Advisory Board and the Technology Executive Committee since we started preparing this report in 2022. So let me now introduce our distinguished panelists and speakers that we have with us here today. So with us, we have Deborah Lee, who is the coordinator of NDC 3.0 in Guatemala and also of the Climate Change Action Plan. And Debbie has been supporting this report also from the very inception and is also involved in several other processes providing scientific information to decision-making processes. Likewise, we have Elizabeth Gilmore, who's an associate professor with University of Carleton in Canada. And Elizabeth has also been supporting the work of this report since 2022 and now also lately in the steering committee, and is also engaged in many other scientific processes. And it's much appreciated the support we have from both Debbie and Elizabeth, specifically also on the feasibility assessment that this report is continuing as initiated through the IPCC process. We'll hear more about that. Then I'm also very pleased to introduce to you Alex Godoy-Foundes, Associate Professor and Director of the Sustainability Research Center and Strategic Resource Management at University of del Desarrollo in Chile. I'm sorry for the pronunciation. I should practice it a bit more. Then I'm also very pleased that today we have with us from the Stockholm Environment Institute, Monica Trujillo, who is based in Colombia. And the office there. And SDI has also contributed significantly to this year's report, and we hear more on that and insights from Monica later on in this session. Then also, not last and not least, we have Liva Kaudura with us, who is a natural resource officer at the FAO. So FAO has also contributed to the report and several chapters, and we look forward to hear more on the reflections from FAO as well. So before I hand over the floor, I also just wanted to mention the flow of this session. So as mentioned, we will hear from Debbie and Elizabeth on the feasibility assessments. How feasible is it for the uptake of bio-based technologies? And we look into different areas of these technologies and aspects of or dimensions of the feasibility. Then we would hear from Monica on the policies, institutions, governance, and cooperation. And then also we hear from Alex, who's led the regional chapter, going more into detail with the Latin America and Caribbean focus and how the region is advancing on the bio-based technologies. Then we would also move to Liva and hear reflections and perspectives from the FAO on the same topic. And of course, also open for questions and answers when we get to that. So I briefly wanted to share with you just a few words on the Climate Technology Progress Report series. It's led by the UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center. And as was also mentioned by Stephen, it builds on the whole process that we have established for preparing emissions gap reports and adaptation gap reports through many years, and sort of having this Climate Technology Progress Report so far as a little brother, but it is aiming to assess progress on climate technologies through annual assessments on where we are at and what we can do to accelerate uptake. As said, this year we have a special focus on bioeconomy and bio-based technologies. What are the key technologies? Where are we at in terms of adoption? And also what progress is being made on scaling up the availability and use? And of course, also how can we accelerate implementation? So just to highlight the key messages from the overall report, we will hear from 3 of the chapters and other perspectives, but As an overall key messaging from the report, we know that bio-based technologies are central to climate and nature goals, and that careful adoption of bio-based technologies can reduce emissions, increase resilience, restore ecosystems, and benefit local livelihoods. We know that the key barriers to scaling is not the technology itself, but it's rather focused on finance and governance, amongst others. So many bio-based technologies are technically matured. And also we see that investment costs, policy frameworks, and market confidence prevent the widespread adoption. Focusing on the regional transitions, we see that the Latin America and Caribbean region is well positioned to become a global leader in this. And we will hear much more on that from Alex through this intervention. So as mentioned also by Stephen, this is a very extensive process with many people involved. We have a steering committee with scientific experts. We have representation from the Climate Technology Center and Network and from the Technology Executive Committee, along with also the UNFCCC Secretariat. We have in this year's report 41 lead and contributing authors, and we've also had several rounds of external reviews with 28 reviewers who have kindly provided their expertise to improve the report. So now, without further ado, I would actually like to hand over to you, Debbie, and present some findings from the feasibility assessment chapter, and also, of course, together with Elizabeth.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you to FAO for the invitation and the space to present this report. So as Sarah mentioned, together with Elizabeth, we've been working on this report since 2022, since the first one, which in this chapter of feasibility, we follow the same methodology that was first started in IPCC's special report on global warming at 1.5 degrees C, and also in AR6. And the importance of this framework is that besides assessing the technological and economic dimensions that are the most common when assessing projects, we include 4 additional dimensions, which is sociocultural, institutional, environmental, and geophysical. So this also helps align the different response options and technologies to the sustainable development goals, and it helps us identify different synergies and trade-offs between mitigation and adaptation, which Elizabeth will be talking to. So I'm just going to start with a few of the key messages, and one is that achieving scale and equitable outcomes really depends on the institutional feasibility. We'll show in further slides the feasibility assessment results, but what we can see is that in the institutional dimension is where we have the lowest scores. Institutional dimension has indicators such as existence of policies and regulations or transparency mechanisms, for example, that enables the adoption of said technologies. Of course, these have a lot of variation. One thing that we did in this report, and we did the same last year actually, is to have regional assessments. So while we did a global feasibility, we also, for the technologies for which we had enough literature and evidence, we also had the difference between Latin America and Africa. So we can also see that even in the regional differentiations, institutional is still is common, so to speak, as a low feasibility. The other important finding in this chapter is that the bioeconomy works at different scales. The feasibility also depends on the scale at which something is implemented. And I think I'm going to move to the other side because the thing is ringing in my ear. Sorry. So some options are feasible at lower scales than others, but also because they have a different focus. And for example, also again for Latin America and the Caribbean, there was a focus on rural areas, given, for example, the focus on energy poverty, the amount of people that are still cooking with traditional biomass sources. Just as an example, in Guatemala, more than 50% of the population still uses open stoves using fuel wood. So the change to efficient cook stoves or using briquettes and biogas was also assessed. And we also focused it when I mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals as inclusive, just, and low emissions. So there is this component of equity and justice. We included some factors such as how indigenous knowledge is being used or indigenous peoples are being considered. In some options, especially when we look into the synergies and trade-offs part, you can have this high component of emissions reduction, but you can also have other trade-off with surrounding communities or ecosystems, or for example, water contamination that then affects food security and therefore livelihoods. So just in terms of a summary of what is the most feasible, we have biogas from waste streams having the strongest synergies across mitigation, adaptation, and sustainable development goals. The first generation biofuels still had more of the economic feasibility barriers, but the second generation ones can improve upon that. We have waste-based biogas as the most viable of the assessed bioenergy technologies, also having strong adaptation outcomes. Advanced biofuels like algal fuels and biohydrogen, again, still have the low economic feasibility, but this also signals that although they're not feasible for the short term, they definitely should be considered for medium-term solutions. And that bioenergy technologies can and should be integrated into broader energy systems as they're essential for enhancing climate resilience and energy security. So here we're talking more about bioelectricity. And then finally, as you can see that the bioeconomy, the options that we looked encompass a really broad spectrum. So if we go to the next slide, please, we can see the extent. Oh, I have the slides. I was pushing anyways, that we looked at 4 different technology groupings. One is the biomass conversion in developing countries, mainly for rural applications, which is more for energy poverty of briquettes, biofuels, maybe small scale electricity, which is where we also had the differentiation between the global Latin America and Africa, although there is also some of this use in South Asia, but that was not included. We have generation for, electricity generation. We have sustainable agriculture and land use. Here we focus more on, for example, agroforestry and forest-based adaptation. So looking more at, about this forestry component and agriculture and food production. And then finally, bio-based materials, where we specifically assess bioplastics and biomaterials for housing construction. So we know that there are many more technologies that fall into the spectrum of bioeconomy. But again, the purpose was not to assess everything, but just to see what are the most feasible options. And considering that even the most feasible options still have some indicators or dimensions that have a medium or low feasibility, which help us pinpoint which are the areas where we need to focus on. So when we say that we have low feasibility, it doesn't mean that we should just discard the idea and move on. It helps us pinpoint where we need to focus more our efforts. So in some cases, for example, we have more of the social cultural, which would lead to social acceptance or how it's integrated into indigenous knowledge, or any issues of like intergenerational or gender equity. So without further ado, my colleague Elizabeth is going to present the results of the feasibility assessment.
Thank you, Debbie. the first way that we, for example, looking at biogas, here we see high feasibility along almost all the dimensions. What this would say to a policymaker or decision maker or practitioner is that if you implement this technology, you're ready to do so, not just in terms of the technology aspects, but also all those other things that we know matter. Right? You can't just put a technology that's ready out there. You need to ensure that it is meeting people's needs and that institutionally you are ready to govern and support that technology. But by contrast, you can see places where not only is there low feasibility, but also information gaps. And this gives two pieces of information. The first piece of information is where there's low feasibility. It doesn't say, oh, it's always going to be low feasibility. But if you want to implement this technology, you need to pay specific attention to these dimensions. It further gives information about where we don't know things. As much as it can be important to know where the science says, yes, we are certain, it can be equally important to know where we do not have evidence. And this can then help guide future research needs that can then help evaluate whether this technology should be implemented. We conduct the assessments for both mitigation as well as for climate adaptation. Now, we know we want to bring these two things together. So we conduct the feasibility assessment separately, in part because not all technologies are going to be where we have the evidence and where we want to evaluate them. But first, I just want to draw your attention here with adaptation. And you can see that while bioeconomy is playing it can contribute a great deal in mitigation with all those high feasibilities. With adaptation, we have a more mixed picture. And so in some cases, you can see that in their present form, that they don't have high feasibility as far as adaptation. And so when you're looking to put together portfolios of mitigation and adaptation, those can also indicate where you may need to think about additional support. You can see, though, also that type of scoring here, for example, on forest-based adaptation, where it scores really highly, but then where you see the gaps are really in that sociocultural and that institutional aspects, that ability to, and this is really just to underscore what Debbie offered, that ability to govern biomass and the bioeconomy will matter greatly in terms of its outcomes. In addition to the mitigation and adaptation aspects, we also then bring this together along with the sustainable development goals to try to give an overall picture to policymakers where there's synergies and trade-offs across these technologies. Now, I can see Sarah already trying to rush me off the stage. No, I'm joking, but it really is to say, please read the report, because the amount of information that we gather when we do a feasibility assessment is really in its strength, and then our ability to then synthesize what otherwise would be an inaccessible amount of peer-reviewed literature.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth and Debbie. I think it's really, I was sitting here thinking how exciting it is that we actually have this feasibility assessment for a variety of sectors and groups of technologies that is carried out under the progress report since 2022. And it's really, I think we should bring those assessments together and see, okay, how many technologies do we actually cover? And what is the feasibility of these technologies? I think it's really, really exciting. And we're so happy to have had you, being part of the process for all these years. Thank you so much. So now, without further ado, I would actually like to invite Monica from Stockholm Environment Institute to share with us some of the findings from the chapter on policies, institutions, governance, and international cooperation. Monica, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Hello to everybody. I am Monica Trujillo. I am a researcher at the Stockholm Environment Institute, SEI. I am representing the Center of Latin America. It's the youngest center of SEI, and we've been working for 7 years, the last 7 years, in all the region. So I am presenting this chapter 5, is the one related to policies, incentives, and governance. On behalf of our key authors, Francis Johnson and other co-authors from SEI and other institutions. So I've been asked, our first guiding question is, how can governance frameworks ensure that the bioeconomy contributes to just and inclusive transition? So that's a very important question here, because this institutional arrangement, this institutional environment, including policies, incentives, regulation, norms, matters as much as technology development. Yeah, because it ensures that bioeconomy includes sustainability and inclusiveness. So it's very important to assess this institutional environment. So as you know, two core elements of the bioeconomy is that it is innovative and also cross-cutting. So innovative here means new ways of managing, organizing, how to use bioresources and how to implement these bio-based technologies. And also cross-cutting, because it includes different sectors that are key for the bioeconomy. For example, it includes the relationship between ministries. In Latin America, for example, the Ministry of Science, Technology, and Innovation is the one that leads the bioeconomy in a lot of countries. But it has to coordinate with agriculture, with environment, with commerce, with industry. So there's a lot of problems of coordination. So here is where the governance and policy mechanisms take a key role on implementation. So to ensure to protect rights and livelihood and local communities. So it has to be participatory and inclusive. Also, there's a need to have an effective policy coordination mechanism. For example, in some countries as Brazil, we have noticed that there's a secretariat on bioeconomy, and it is a high level and high political power to connect different ministries. That's important, to connect those different ministries that are involved on goals and targets. And it's very important also to connect in a multi-level governance, to connect the national level with the subnational level, because there's a gap of implementation. So in other countries, for example, there are agencies that command the policy elaboration and implementation. But each country has to identify the best mechanisms that is adapted for its priorities, its vision on the bioeconomy, and its capacities. So we need to recognize in Latin America and in the tropics as well that there are different types of bioeconomies coexisting. There's a small-scale bioeconomy connected to biodiversity and local communities, and it's more artisanal bioeconomy. And there's also a large-scale bioeconomy, more sophisticated. So these political and governance mechanisms are key to connect those types of different types of bioeconomy because both are important and matters and need different type of instruments, political instruments to address those needs. So another institutional arrangement that are key to address these biotechnologies are, for example, research clusters or innovative platforms as living labs, and also peer learning and exchange experience platforms, because it's important to scale and to connect different types of views. And the last key message that I wanted to present is that the international cooperation and platforms are very important to this progress, to this bio-based technology. So that's the key message that I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Monica. And I also want to express my appreciation to the SEI for the leadership in developing this part of the report. So that's really appreciated and brings a wealth of information to this year's report. So now I would like to turn to Alex, who's been championing the regional chapter of the progress report this year. So Alex, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. My first words is to say thank you for the invitation to be a speaker today, and an invitation to be one of the authors on that chapter. And it was a very an honor work with you, like co-authors. And I have two biases, so I don't want to repeat that Debbie and Monica and Elizabeth talk, because finally it's the same that we find in Latin America and the Caribbean. I have two biases. One is my bias because I am a member of the IPCC working in mitigation. Another bias is because between 2017 and 2019, I was member of the high-level panel expert of the Committee for Food Security in FU in Rome. So I would like to address that presentation with focus on food and into the industrial area. So, the bioeconomy is a very confusing concept because the people think it's something different and so on, but it's nothing different. And because when we did the screening, what happened into Latin America and the Caribbean, there you can see that table. The idea is to surprise you. We have a lot of actions and projects very well related to the bioeconomy. For example, in Brazil, you have a different kind of crops producing biofuels. You have some specific, for example, on sewage of of different kind of industry and local level, producing biogas and so on, bioenergy. We have producing biochar, like a carbon capture process, or for example, we are trying to use the food wastes in order to recover that kind of materials and use them like a bio-based materials to replace the plastics, for example. So indeed, right now, one classification that report is proposing is the sustainable agriculture and agriculture regenerative. It's something that is very important for the region, because right now we are producing maybe and vegetables and food for the global north. We are exporting is in the case of Chile is 7% of all GDP, but producing and 40% of the employment. Maybe in another kind of countries of the region, it maybe is higher than in Chile. Indeed, in Colombia, it's very predictive. Now, the coffee right now is a huge issue. But right now, if you are walking around the pavilions, if you are going to Japan, for example, Japan is not producing coffee, but they are producing new kind of plastic, bio-based materials using the wastes of the coffee and so on. So in that case, we need to understand that kind of technologies has very useful, like Debbie and Elizabeth say, because we have an over 40% of the biodiversity is based on our landscape. So our landscape is a very productive landscape, producing food, producing forestries, and for example, this is very strong and outcome into our economy and so on. So we need to try to move ahead in the bioeconomy process, because it's an natural assets that we have right now. The second one is that's the good news. We have a lot of projects, we have a lot of approaches and so on. What is the bad news? Until today, the projects in Latin America and the Caribbean and the small projects maybe will focus on local communities with low impacts. One of the messages of that chapter is we need to scale up. Why? Because the bioethanol in Brazil maybe could be a huge industry. The recovering of the wastes could be an industry, fisheries, agriculture, but we need to, and that is a very silver bullet, because we learned that kind of projects could be thinking on how we can be more inclusive. Right now, the bioeconomy projects are so inclusive because we have the experience, including the native people, the digital and local knowledge on them. So the advantage for the Latin American and the Caribbean is because we have the experience, including the indigenous and local knowledge, and just we need the right policies, the regional integration in order to scale up of them, in order to strengthen that kind of economy. In the next, I told you we need the policy integration, because maybe in Chile and Colombia, we have different kind of policies. If you are studying the Central America, you can find different kind of the different governance, different structure, maybe different focus and policy. We need to try to integrate the kind of policies, because it could be very easier to try to fix on common standards, and we could be moving ahead in the MRB in order to deploy measures, reporting and verification system for that kind of an economy. So indeed, we have a very good advantage to strengthen the sub-regional specialization to scale up. For example, in the southern corn, we have maybe the largest scale of the sugar cane soy system for fuels, bioproducts. Maybe in the Andes and Central America, we can work with the smallholder and agroforestry, sustaining biodiversity, livelihoods. Maybe in Chile, we can move ahead in the certified plantation forestry, like a sustainable forestry. In Ecuador and Peru, maybe robust fisheries and agriculture and so on. We can get a specialization. So what is the good news? We are in the pavilion of the food and the EFU. The agricultural activities is a key industrial sector in order to mobilize the carbon capture, use the wastes in order to recover that material and reintroduce it for the bioeconomy, providing jobs and scale up through the region. What happened with institutions? That you say. We have a high diversity of institution, and maybe if we promote the dialogue between us, maybe we can fix something more similar and maybe exchange the knowledge between us. And what is important, the governance, the standardization, and so on. Because right now, in another room, we are discussing about the adaptation metrics. We are talking about the negotiations and the finance. But if we can get money, we need to propose something. This is a very good strategy in order to propose the right projects, in order to be attractive for the international fundings, in order to recover the economy. Sorry, this is the conclusion of the chapter. Finally, inclusion. We have experience working with indigenous and local knowledge. This is very good for the SDGs. And we have a very good chance to move in the bio-based materials in order to reduce the food waste. We need to work in the MRV. We need it, fix the standards. And finally, what are the priorities for the 2030? Embed the bioeconomy, linking for the adaptation and metrics, climate and mitigation. Scale up the successful project, not just, oh, it's a rural economy just for few local. No. We need to scale up. We need to try to transfer that knowledge for another regions, increasing the impacts. Deploy the digital MRV certifications, platforms, common platforms. The coffee is not just producing in Colombia. It's a very good coffee. No? Brazil's producing coffee. We have fisheries like in Peru. We have a common products that we can work together and mobilize finance, propose that kind of projects in order to be attractive to receive fundings from the global north. Okay, this is a very good model. You can read the chapter. So the highlight is right now we can propose context-specific pathways for different kind of products related to the food production. We have a high potential and we need to try to reduce the bottlenecks. We can work in the strategic nexus, energy security, food security, and water security. We can align the outcomes with the NDC. Why? Because right now, for example, the NDC is not just about mitigation. That is a very good silver bullet in order to work for mitigation, carbon capture, and so on, and adaptation as well. And finally, the inclusion is not negotiable because we are very close with indigenous rights, cultural heritage, and so on. And finally, that Copenhagen Center say, we need more regional cooperation and maybe GRULAC on ILAC, we need it. Thanks, Sarah, for all. Thanks, my colleagues. So the EFO is the driving right now.
Thanks so much, Alex, and we really appreciate how this chapter has evolved throughout this year and the recommendations coming out from it. So now, last but not least, I would actually like to invite Leva from FAO to share some reflections also on how you see the bioeconomy reshaping agricultural and land use practices to enhance both productivity and climate resilience, and how we can ensure smallholders and communities to actually be included and are not left behind. So please, Leva.
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here. For those of you, I changed the slide already. So if you're interested in the report, I guess you can access through the QR code. My name is Leva Kaugure, a Natural Resources Officer in FAO. I'm just very honored to be here with the authors of this report. I would like to highlight, I'm not one of them. I'm stepping in for the colleagues who actually contributed to the report. But nevertheless, happy to represent FAO. The message that we come to COP as FAO, we say that agri-food system solutions are climate solutions. And what we see that the bioeconomy is really offering one of those solutions. And it is really a paradigm shift also, because as already highlighted, there are so many practices through different value chains. And I will get back to the value chain approach a bit later. But we really see that the bioeconomy really offers this transition pathways for transforming agri-food systems, because most of the bioeconomy's feed actually comes from the agri-food systems. So by by applying at the national level bioeconomy pathways, we can provide the feed in the circularity. We all can also can provide more livelihoods and diversification for smallholders, and also go back into circularity in the agri-food system. So that's why, as FAO, we also put a focus on the bioeconomy. So this is also not a new kind of topic that FAO has worked on. In 2015, there were about 60 agriculture ministers that gave a mandate to FAO to coordinate the work on sustainable bioeconomy. And as a result, there was principles and criteria developed. What is sustainable bioeconomy? And then in 2021, also sustainable bioeconomy was included in our strategic framework. So that means that annually we are reporting to program priority area on sustainable bioeconomy to our council and also to our governing bodies and our member states. So it is embedded in our day-to-day work. And then last but not least, I think it was already mentioned, of course, the G20 prioritization of bioeconomy, and now by COP30 also presidency really picking up this topic. And we are really proud to really work closely with G20 presidencies as well as Brazil to really bring more attention to this topic also here at COP, including through this report, right? So more on the practical aspects, today at least 27 countries in 3 regions have adopted bioeconomy strategies. And from our kind of knowledge in FAO, there are 14 more in development. And then if we are broadening it to bioscience and biotechnology, over 60 countries are pursuing bioeconomy pathways. So that really shows that also countries are picking up at the national level and see it as a transformative action to transform agricultural systems. And of course, some of those strategies, including Namibia and Uruguay, FAO has been providing a technical support to develop those bioeconomy pathways. And then today, I'm really glad also to announce that FAO is launching updated FAO dashboard analyzing the national bioeconomy strategies. And this includes also the analysis how these national strategies are aligning with the IPCC mitigation and adaptation actions, and linking also global biodiversity framework targets. So that's also linking the Rio conventions. And based on these stats also, that has been feeding in the chapter 5 of this report. And then let me just give you some examples from this dashboard. So among 1,222 actions extracted from the pathways, there are 64% mapped or linked to the mitigation, and 30% linked to the adaptation actions. And additionally, 36 nationally determined contributions and 24 long-term low-emission development strategies, or LT-LEDs in the UNFCCC slang, reference bioeconomy. So again, it shows that the countries are really picking it up in their also the climate reporting and policies related to the UNFCCC. So then to highlight other examples in Latin America, for example, in Colombia, LT-LEDs, bioeconomy is positioned as a central sustainable production supported by investment fund and biodiversity-based goods and services. Costa Rica highlights the sustainable use of biological resources within a circular economy, and within its third NDCs, promoting bioeconomy to boost resilience. And then in Uruguay's national adaptation plans, bioeconomy is emphasized as optimizing biological resources. So these, again, emphasizing that these examples show that countries are really picking up and bioeconomy in their pathways to transform agri-food systems in these climate change policies. And then go back to the question how we can link and ensure that also local communities at the local level are benefiting for the bioeconomy practices. So our work in Cambodia, which was funded by the by the GCF, highlights key lessons. And this is where I'm getting back to more kind of value chain approach. So here we worked with the cashew nut value chain. So we see that working through the value chain approach, the climate smart and climate smart technologies can be really integrated at the local level. And then promoting affordable climate smart technologies also is a way how to integrate that at the local level. Also investing in the skills and in the extension services is critical, from those lessons, and enabling smallholder practice in a higher value chain activities is also one of the lessons learned, and that helps to build resilience with early warning and post-harvest innovations. And also, of course, the co-creating solutions with the communities and not for the communities. So those are some of the practices. And I think that also goes back to what you were saying earlier, is that there are different value chains across the countries, and this is where the cross-sharing could happen across different countries on similar value chains. And then just to conclude is, if bioeconomy is to serve as a new economic paradigm, it also must do so by leaving no one behind. So I will stop here and give a word back to you.
Thank you so much for that. And I think that gives a really nice perspective from the local to the global level on how bioeconomy and bio-based technologies are paving the way for this very much needed transition. So with this, I would actually encourage everyone who have a question to approach our speakers after the session. And then I would just like to thank you all, both for being here with us today, those of you in the room and joining virtually, and also not least to all of you at an individual or institutional level who have contributed to this year's report. I would encourage everyone to have a look at the report. It contains like a wealth of information on how we progress on bio-based technologies. So with this, I would like to close and just say, let's get together. We need to continue collaborating and ensure that we reaches this very much transition for a more sustainable future. Thank you so much, everyone.